Okay, and we're live.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the West Contra Costa Unified School Districts Independent Redistricting Commission for November 23rd. I will call the meeting to order at this time, and we will take a roll call. Is Ms. Forrest here or Mr. Diaz, are you going to ready to take roll call?
I can take roll call. Commissioner Butler, Commissioner Diaz-Noriega, Commissioner Tualu,
Present.
Commissioner Hilliard, Commission Chair Gordon,
Present.
and Commissioner Lazaretti.
It looks like Commissioner Lazaretti may be on the attendees list. So if there's a way to elevate Commissioner Lazaretti to a panelist, that may be appropriate.
I see him. Let me promote.
And we may want to also promote Dr. Collingwood. Well, we did. Excellent. At this time, we do not have a quorum to move forward for the meeting. And as I stated before, it is a public input meeting. We do not need a quorum for that portion of the time. So I'd like to start with our attorney, Mr. Pitts, to kind of explain what has been happening so far. And at this time, unless we get a quorum, we will simply move the agenda items for later on in the meeting, and we will start with our items, our public input and outreach.
Thank you, Chair Gordon. Is it possible to set the view to the room as well while we're going, Nixon? Thank you. So I just want to provide some background on what we're doing tonight with respect to the public outreach portion of the meeting before the Commission's demographer, Dr. Collingwood, can provide a short presentation on sort of where things stand and the kind of the maps that have been drafted to this point and the the community input that we're looking for in connection with those maps. So as many people may know, and I would note that Commissioner Hilliard has entered. Commissioner Gordon, would you like to continue with the full agenda, or would you like me to go on with this portion?
Why don't we now then return to the full agenda?
Okay.
So at this point, let the record record that, or the minutes record that Commissioner Hilliard has joined us, and we do have a quorum. So moving on to our item 3, approval of the agenda. Are there questions or comments from commissioners on the agenda? If not, it is an action item. It needs approval, needs a motion.
I'd like to move that we approve the agenda.
I have a motion
Second.
from Commissioner Hilliard
I second.
and a second from Commissioner Tulu. Roll call vote.
Commissioner Butler, Commissioner Diaz-Noriega, Commissioner Tualu,
Yes.
Commissioner Hilliard,
Yes.
Commission Chair Gordon,
Yes.
Commissioner Lazaretti.
We got a thumbs up. So he might be having problems with his microphone.
Sorry, I was on mute, yes.
There we go. Wonderful. Passes unanimously. Moving on to item 4, approval of our minutes for our last meeting. Are there questions or comments from commissioners? Seeing none, is there public comment on our minutes? Mr. Diaz, is
None.
there anyone?
None.
None? Then I will entertain a motion for approval of our minutes.
I move that we approve the minutes.
I second.
I have a motion from Commissioner Lazzaretti and a second from Commissioner Hilliard. Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Butler, Commissioner Diaz-Noriega, Commissioner Tualu,
yes,
Commissioner Hilliard,
Yes.
Commission Chair Gordon,
Yes.
Commissioner Lazzaretti.
Yes.
Moving on to our next agenda item, item 5, public comment. This is a time that you are allowed to speak on items not already on our agenda. We do ask that they be under our jurisdiction and that you do limit your comments to 3 minutes. Excuse me, is there any public comment at this time?
See none.
Seeing none, we'll move on to item 6, our discussion and possible action items, our public outreach, and we'll go back again to Mr. Pitts and Dr. Collingwood as we open this up for the discussion and input from our community.
Thank you, Chair Gordon. So as many of the attendees know, but I think it's important to lay out for other people, I am, I'll start by introducing myself. I'm an attorney who works on civil rights and voting rights and redistricting issues, as well as various other issues of constitutional law. And I'm legal counsel to the commission. I applied to serve the commission and was fortunate enough to be selected to serve as counsel to the commission. The commission is an independent commission that is charged with developing the map that will identify the 5 trustee areas for use in West Contra Costa Unified School District trustee elections from 2022 through 2030. The members of the commission, 4 of whom are present tonight, applied to serve voluntarily and were selected from amongst the various applicants by retired United States Court District Judge Thelton Henderson. The commission was created as part of a settlement of a lawsuit against West Contra Costa Unified School District, alleging that its prior use of at-large large method of electing members of the Board of Trustees violated both the Federal Voting Rights Act and the California Voting Rights Act. And as a part of the settlement of that lawsuit, the district agreed to convert from at-large elections, meaning elections where all 5 trustees were elected by all people throughout the district, to a district-based system where there would be 5 districts, each of which would elect its own representative. And there was an interim map that was developed for the 2020 elections that governed the existing trustees at this time. And then the commission is charged with creating a new map for use going forward based on the updated census data that was generated from the 2000 census. Just to give folks a sense of what has happened so far and where things stand. As noted already, the district retained legal counsel and also retained Dr. Collingwood, who's on this call, a professional demographer, whose job is to advise the commission on the process of developing a new trustee area map. The commission developed a plan for public outreach, and that includes tonight's meeting, which is the 3rd of 5 public outreach meetings that must take place before the commission adopts a preliminary plan. And that includes holding a commission meeting in each of the 5 trustee areas. So the first 2 meetings occurred over the last 2 weeks in Pinole Valley and El Cerrito. Tonight's meeting is occurring at Richmond High School as well as virtually. And subsequent meetings for those who are interested to attend, and everyone is welcome to attend any meeting regardless of where they live in the district or regardless of residency. The subsequent meetings will be held on November 30th at the Fireside Hall at Contra Costa College and on December 7th at Kennedy High School. The district will then the commission will then adopt a preliminary plan on December 14th. We'll then hold 3 additional public hearings prior to its adoption of a recommended plan on January 25th, and its adoption of a final districting plan on February 15th, 2002. One thing that I know all commissioners agree on is that public participation is very important to this process. The map that the commission adopts will be used to determine who will be representing those who reside in the West Contra Costa Unified School District on the Board of Trustees. And so it really determines the way in which that map is structured, and the folks who are in particular districts will determine how individuals who live in the district can have a say in what happens, the decisions that are made at the school board level. And so making sure that the map is one that will enable people to have their voices heard, as opposed to one that will prevent certain communities from having their voices heard, is crucial. And understanding those sort of lines and distinctions has to come from the community. Obviously, we have a very committed set of commissioners and a knowledgeable demographer, but there's a lot of information that can only come from the community. And with that, I think I will turn the matter over to Dr. Collingwood to explain to everyone what he's done and what maps are available at this point for the public to provide input on.
Thank you, Casey. Could we make me a co-host so I can share my screen? All right. So this is a presentation, basically similar, not the same, from last week when we presented. So we have 4 proposed maps. I have in mind another one that I'm working on that I'll post by next week, but it's really just a slight adjustment. It's kind of a I guess an amalgamation perhaps is the right word, of a couple of the existing plans. But the main charge with what we're doing here is, given the court order, is one of the primary features of our project here is to examine the extent to which we're able to draw majority minority seats, and specifically with a focus on the Latino or Hispanic population in the jurisdiction, which we can draw one of those seats using citizen voting age population data. That's the data that's required when we examine racial demographics to be able to make that assessment. And then the other very important feature relevant to various voting rights laws is to examine the ability to elect for Black or African American seat, regardless of kind of existing voting behavior or existing elected officials. That kind of thing isn't taken into account when we're drawing districts. We're primarily focused on these other features, and I'll walk through some of that. So my colleague and associate Sean Long also works with me on some of the data collection here and some of the basic analysis. I should also note that I'm an associate professor of political science at University of New Mexico, but grew up in Northern California and was also an assistant and associate professor at UC Riverside for a while. So I'm very familiar with California politics. So just a quick overview. We have some basic districting principles. Some of them Casey has or will touch on. And then a presentation of the maps with a focus on key distinctions between the 4. And then basically there is a website that folks can go to play around interactively with the current setup. And then with the goal of soliciting feedback. So these maps are not set in stone by any purpose, right? They are designed to fit a couple sets of criteria. They're kind of guideposts, but by no, they're definitely not definitive in any way at this point. but it's just to help the conversation move towards the ultimate goal of selecting the most appropriate and best fitting map for the community here. So again, those the commissioners who are on the call last time and the meeting know this, right, many times now. So the main goal, first goal, is population equality. So based off of the redistricting data available on the California statewide database adjusted for prisoners, the total population in the area is 260,000 people, 791. There's 5 trustee seats or districts. And so therefore, mathematically, we would want 52,158 people per seat. That's obviously, there's going to be some deviation to that. Part of that deviation is our desire to fit other criteria. And so in general, we're going to have a little deviation. So some of the seats are going to be a little bit higher, say 3% over this 52,158 ideal point, and maybe 2% below. And that's okay. Basically, I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding is you get a 10% deviation full range. And then, but we try to keep that as low as possible given these other criteria. Vicki Gordon here has posted the maps here. So interactively, if you want to go to that, and I'll have a link there towards the end. And so that's the kind of baseline method. And the reason we do this is obvious, is a constitutional principle of one person, one vote. If someone is in a district where there are 15% fewer in that district than another seat, then those people's votes count more, in a sense, right? They have more representation. It's kind of like me living in New Mexico in the Senate, for the US Senate. My vote counts more than your vote in California for the US Senate. They're just kind of rubbing in a little bit. But that's the kind of idea, and we want to limit that in the context of, House and other types of representation bodies. And so from a VRA compliance seat, we want to be able to examine whether it's possible to draw a district that's 50% plus 1 citizen voting age of a discrete racial or ethnic population defined by the US Census. And so this is not necessarily country of origin, but rather the Hispanic or Latino population writ large, right? And so if we can do that, then that's one of the goals, right, that we're going to shoot to do in central, the central part of this area, of course. And citizen voting age population takes account of people who are eligible to vote, right? They're not necessarily registered to vote, but they're eligible to vote. So non-citizens are not eligible to vote, and people under the age of 18 are not eligible to vote. And so there's going to be some gaps here between some of the different racial and ethnic populations. Those that are more recent immigrant groups, for example, are going to have a reduction in their population from a citizen voting age population in terms of this measure. Then we also look at compactness. Ideally, we would want to circle, but given these other requirements, that's very, very difficult to find. And then contiguity, you're not going to be able to draw a district that's an island over here connected to another part of town. There has to be, you have to be able to drive from one part to another. And then we take into account natural human-made boundaries, highways, for example, major highways, often railways, often mountains, swamps, those kinds of things that are going to divide areas. There's kind of a tertiary type standard. And then to the extent that we can, we try to respect cities and county lines and try to put school attendance zones together to the extent that we can. But given various challenges, it's always very difficult to put all of these things together. So here again, you can click here, go to this website. This will pull up the proposed maps, and each map will have publicly available information for those who are not necessarily demographers or experts, or who know how to use shapefiles and GIS, geographic information systems data. You can still participate and provide comments to us so that we can improve these maps. Those who have more of the kind of technical sophistication can download the appropriate files and use software and analyze things. And I've provided many shapefiles and data for people to look at that. So The first map here, I'm just going to kind of give a preview. This is similar, very similar to the existing kind of temporary map. And we have District 3 here, and this is the, I think that's about 53% Hispanic citizen voting age
So we're not
population.
seeing the maps again, Dr. Collingwood. You need to.
Oh, right. So I thought I'd set it up so that we didn't have that problem. Hang on a second. Yeah, desktop. I'm just going to go over here. Okay. Okay. Strike that from the record. So we have map 1 here, right? So again, you go to this website. This is specific to what we're doing here. And there's proposed map 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we have the kind of overview here. And so each one of these is a different map. And the way that we've set it up, these two are quite similar. These two are more similar. Okay. This one, these two are similar to the existing set of maps, with the exception that this one over here, as you can see, this little area down here picks up and goes into District 3 and moves this section out of District 2. Okay, and then make some adjustments over here. The Latino citizen voting age population in District 3 goes from, say, 53 to 56 in this one. And the Black population in District 2 holds somewhat similar, but might drop down slightly. Okay, so we don't want to only focus on these numbers, but these are key figures as we go about kind of thinking about the different maps. Meanwhile, District 5 down here is a strong majority Anglo-white district in all maps. And then District 4 is more of a mix and match type district from a racial demographic perspective. And then District 1 up here in the north, you can see there are different configurations, is larger on the Asian AAPI population. So from a very baseline level, this is what we're dealing with. And what I've observed so far is that District 1 and District 5 are, because they're kind of on the tail ends and stuff like that, they're going to probably not change that much. I mean, you could change them, of course, but like anything, but those in some sense make a lot of sense. And then a lot of the work is kind of figuring out this region here and how to go about pairing that so that people feel like their neighborhoods are not getting split and things like that, while at the same time looking at the racial and ethnic populations and stuff like that. So I'll just give you a quick example. So let's take a look at map 2. And here you can click on the PDF file. This is generated from the software that's used to draw these lines. And this will go over each district one at a time. It takes a second to load, so please excuse me. So here what we see is the first one is District 1. So my suggestion to those of you who are looking at this, right, have a Google map page open, or whatever sort of generic driving map website you go to. We also have provided HTML maps for interactive purposes that you can zoom in, that are shaded by different racial populations, citizen voting age population. And then you have this kind of overall aggregate map. Okay, and so you can kind of put these together and maybe go back and forth and kind of move in and out and whatnot, and to kind of get a sense of these things. But what we see here are, this provides demographic information. It provides overall population of this district here. It gives you the deviation. So this one's very, very good in the sense that it's only deviating 178 people from the ideal value. And you can see here it's keeping these kind of these are different boundaries, these turquoise lines of education attendance zones, right? We're trying to the extent that we can keep those together and trying to keep Pinole and Hercules, if I'm pronouncing those right, correct me if I'm wrong, together, right? That's kind of the Hercules Pinole area. And then you can go down and you can look at this number here. White 20 is the total number of white individuals from this 2020 adjusted data living in that district. That's 20%. And then if you look at Black, there's 6,796 Black individuals living in that district, or people who self-identify as Black, about 13%, which is very similar to the overall US population. And then 24% people who are identifying as Hispanic. And then a plurality of people in this district are identifying as Asian. It's my understanding that these are disproportionately people of Filipino descent. Okay, and we can have a longer discussion of exactly how the census goes about identifying people. So just for kind of a quick aside, if someone is both Black and Hispanic, but in the US Census, they click the Hispanic box as well because Hispanicity is an ethnicity, right? So you can be both Black and Hispanic because, you know, Black is classified as a race, whereas Hispanic is classified as an ethnicity, very technical, small detail. But basically Hispanic identity in terms of the census is going to prioritize over race. Okay, so I can have more conversations about that if people are interested. That's from the 2020 data. The CVAP 19 data is among people who are citizen voting age population. Okay, so what you see here is very interesting actually, is that the Asian citizen voting age population is almost identical to the Asian population. And then the Hispanic population, however, is 24%, but the voting age population is only 17. So there's an underrepresentation there. That's due to a variety of reasons. The Hispanic population in general tends to be younger, and so not as many are of voting age, for example. And then using voter registration data and some various statistical methods, I looked at the 2020 voter registration file for the County of Contra Costa subset to the WCCUSD jurisdiction, and then aggregated data by race for people who are registered voters. And we once again see very similar numbers across the board for these different groups. Okay, but this is probably what I would call an Asian ability to elect district, because, and there's going to be, in case you would know this very well, there's going to be some, you know, variation around that. But that's kind of where that population's more focused. Okay. And then you basically can go down through and look at similar maps and get a sense of, always look at population, look at deviation, and then these are some of the critical numbers. The CVAP really are the critical numbers to look at in terms of the demographics. And then for your own analytical purposes, you want to compare that as well against the population numbers to get a sense of how, you know, representation might be potentially changing, and voting powers is variable depending on the different racial or ethnic group that you're looking at because of these other issues. And so here is District 3. This is the primarily the Latino largest population, right? Looking at areas around San Pablo. And here, this one is nearly 56% Hispanic citizen voting age population. And there's some other key things down here. So I just wanted to go through that as an example. And then this file has all the shape files and things that you would need. If there are anything that you need to augment your analysis, if you're so inclined, I'm happy to get that for you. And here you can zoom in with these interactive plots. And then here we also are shading the different areas, the census block, by different racial CVAP, citizen voting age population percentages. And then there's some additional data. We have percent Black, percent AAPI Asian, and then percent white. Okay. As you're looking at this, keep in mind that something like this might say, ooh, look at this large white population over here, huge space. You click on it, you look, and there's only basically 24 people there, right? keep in mind that the citizen voting age population is an estimate. So sometimes in very small jurisdictions, the numbers can be a little bit off. But that's just something to keep in mind. Where these larger areas like this, these larger blocks, big space here, try not to let that influence your understanding of the districts, because not a lot of people live in those areas. Okay, so I just wanted to point that out. This is mountains, water areas, things like that. Okay, so that's what I got for now. And I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Collingwood. Are there questions or comments from board members? From commissioners? But in my past, they're creeping in. I'm not seeing any.
I have a couple of questions.
Okay. Commissioner Lazaretti.
Okay, thanks again for the presentation and all the work on this, Dr. Collingwood. It looks really impressive and you really explain it well. One question as I look over the maps and the different proposals, I'm just wondering about is, given the current map that the district is using and how demographics have changed with the 2020 census, how representative, based on the data analysis you've done, how representative do you feel like the current district map is of the different population groups, and how reflective it is of the different communities of interest, in terms of looking at like how radically we may want to change the current map?
Well, I would say that the current kind of setup, right, would the most similar map, and it is slightly different to make some minor adjustment for population changes. For map 1 is the most similar, and you can tell that the previous demographer did try to identify the communities of interest in those different districts, at least creating 2. And at the time, I think it was maybe not quite majority minority. I don't actually know for the Hispanic district, or the District 3. There was an attempt to basically put racial populations together as communities of interest. Of course, communities of interest are more general than that. They don't have to be racial or ethnic. But given the kind of challenges that we're dealing with, it's certainly something that we're strongly considering. So I would say it's pretty good. It's pretty well represented. There are ways to draw a map that bumps, quite frankly, the Latino population up some and bumps the Black population up some, but that has to be balanced against the kind of configuration of the map, right? Somewhat, right? And so that would be, for example, maps 3 and 4 have that kind of more C-shaped design and have a slightly larger Black population in it. I think we're talking more like 43, 44 versus 41 or so, and still keeping a fairly 53, 54% Latino CVAP population, right? And so in the end, a lot of this is going to come down to kind of the edge communities and where people in the community, or based on your guys' kind of knowledge on the ground, where kind of the boundary lines are going to have to make sense, right? And as we go forward, it'll become probably pretty clear to everybody involved exactly where that's going to be. But I think the current map is like a very good starting point in terms of the demographic distribution. And from an electoral standpoint, of course, you never know. And I think we had some of this discussion last time. That's not up to us in the sense, right? That's on the community organizing. That's on the political connection between candidates and voters and campaigning and stuff like that. And so you are potentially going to run into a turnout situation, especially I would argue in maybe the Latino population, right, where you might have a lower turnout in a kind of a less salient election, and that community may have a harder time electing a candidate of choice. So given what I know about race in America and, Latino politics, which is one of my subfields that I study as an academic, that would be something that I think you would want to take into account. Now, of course, we're still kind of playing a bit of a guessing game there in terms of the turnout effects. And, I've estimated some of that using very statistical methods. But, it's still an estimate, it's still a bit of a guess, a little more guessing work there. But overall, I would say the initial maps are pretty reflective. And if they make sense from like an on the ground perspective to you all, I think that's a really good starting point. I think I would say that wholeheartedly. And I don't know if that's, again, a too professorial, long-winded answer. So forgive me for
That
going
makes
on
a lot
for a
of
while.
sense.
Yeah.
And then the follow-up on the Latino question, as you mentioned, the Latino population, voting population, looking at the issue nationally, is a very diverse group. And, Latinos vote drastically different based on their background and countries of origin and, other issues. How much diversity do you see within the Latino population in West Contra Costa, to the degree that that may impact, like if there are particular subgroups of Latinos that may have different, interests or different, political or, cultural values
Sure.
or priorities, if you know what I mean, like
Yeah,
obviously if
that's
we
it.
have a human population in West Contra Costa, that may affect things, right? Well, we probably don't, but.
Yeah. So this is a fantastic question. It's something that those of us who work in this area really spend a lot of time thinking and we have full conferences about this kind of thing. As a general rule in American politics, and first I'll start a little broader, then I'll kind of narrow it down. As a general rule in American politics, Cubans tend to vote more conservatively, as people kind of, you hear the wins, you hear Florida, right? You hear those stories. But and then you might have some variability with the more recent, say, like the Venezuelan diaspora that's moved to Florida as well. That kind of like the anti-Castros, what have you, or the the anti-communist kind of thing going on, right? That people who left, and so there's some discussion about that. But in general, Central Americans and Mexican Americans and Puerto Ricans and Dominicans tend to be lining up together as a general rule. Now, if it's somewhat a candidate of one group versus a candidate of another group, if there's enough of those different voting populations within the jurisdiction, that's another question. And that's going to be hard to pull apart. My sense is they will be more cohesive here in Contra Costa and indeed throughout California. I've done a lot of racially polarized voting of the Latino population in the state of California all over. And I generally find a pretty cohesive population, regardless of whether you have a kind of a panoply of Salvadorians combined with Mexicans combined with Nicaraguans or whatever. And what's interesting too is that some of these groups, they do have more conservative leanings on kind of quote cultural issues and stuff like that. So one thing that we're working on, we haven't gotten there yet, but it is a task that we will do to some degree, is we will do a racially polarized voting analysis of different groups in this area with a particular focus on African Americans, Asians, and Black voters. Now, I'll tell you overall, my intuition will be at the general aggregate level, at the general level going for, say, president and governor, you won't see that much racially polarized voting here. Okay, and why is that? That's because East Bay, California, Bay Area, white voters in these areas tend to be more Democratic leaning. And so they're going to combine with various racial configurations of other groups to vote more in the Democratic direction. That's probably going to be the case. At the school board level, though, you might expect to see some racial polarization with people preferring co-ethnic candidates that are, a co-ethnic candidate, say if you're Latino, co-ethnic candidate would be someone who's a Latino candidate. And so that's on the docket. So we'll be able to answer that question to more degree when we go back and we look at previous elections, but that will take some time because it's another, we have to bring in more precinct data and do other things. But I just wanted to let you know that is forthcoming.
Great, great. Thanks. That's a great explanation. And then the one last question I had for now is, this district is a very diverse district, both ethnically and economically. There's a lot of economic diversity, as I'm sure you've seen, between the different trustee areas. You have a lot of, in El Cerrito, Kensington, you have a more affluence, Pinole, Hercules. You have, strong middle class base. And then obviously you have other areas of the district that have pockets of significant poverty. I'm just curious, in terms of your approach, how does the economic diversity fit in with the ethnic diversity in terms of how you look to draw these maps, or how you see us weighing the different maps?
Yeah, so when it comes to like economic, socioeconomic status characteristics, normally we're talking levels of education and household median income or something like that. You're going to generally see a correlation between white and Asian and higher status on those measures. Now, of course, that depends on the Asian population that you're looking at. That's not always going to be the case. Kind of use an example. My brother's wife's Cambodian, right? And her family had to escape the Khmer Rouge, right? And so that's a totally different immigration situation than someone coming from India, right? With pursuing a graduate training or something like that, right? So we always have to caveat that population in particular when we're looking at that, but that's a general rule. And then the converse is generally the case, where the Hispanic or Latino and Black populations tend to be on the lower side of this socioeconomic status line, as it were. So they tend to have lower education outcomes and lower, just educational opportunities and income, right? And so it's a separate analysis, but usually the SES data comes in through the communities of interest analysis. Okay, from a VRA perspective, it's a voting rights compliance perspective, the socioeconomic status is irrelevant, right? It matters from a community of interest perspective. So in that regard, it kind of comes a little bit lower down the line. And I can have a longer discussion about race and kind of socioeconomic status and political ideology, right? I don't know if that's necessarily our call here, but that's something that we could discuss more generally. Obviously, that's harder to drill down precisely on the specific location at hand. But I will say, like, one of the things, in case you would know that that in the we're looking at things like the Jingles test in voting rights compliance cases, but then another thing is what's called the Senate factors, and there we would look at socioeconomic outcomes and voting behavior and voter turnout, right? And to see whether there's a relationship between race, educational and income outcomes, and voter participation, with the logical outcome that people with lower income and lower educational opportunities don't vote as much. That's not always the case, but that's often the case, right? So that's something that is built in through the community of interest kind of angle here. But it's my sense that when you're prioritizing, not prioritizing, but examining the kind of racial angle here and looking at how these districts line up, that whole stuff is likely to get brought in. But we also need to remind ourselves, let's look to the community. Let's make sure that these lines make sense to them. And it's not only just one set of variables.
Great. Thank you.
Well said. We do have another hand up from Commissioner Tualu. We do have an attendee hand up. We do see you. At this time, we're taking questions and comments from commissioners. Craig, are you done with your questions? Commissioner Tualu, would you like to unmute?
Yes, thank you for opportunity to speak. I'm looking at the map 3 or plan 3, where I think there is quite significant change compared to the current map. Especially, I'm looking at the District 4 will go now to south of Richmond. Actually, it's not like south of Richmond, but like a central part of Richmond. which is, I think, before maybe that one belongs to District 3. So that's why I kind of like interested in that. And also, I see that the map kind of like split the property of Contra Costa College. So my suggestion, if we will go with this plan, maybe include whether, Contra Costa College, the whole property will go to District 3 or District 4. It doesn't matter to me, but I don't think it will change in terms of total population because nobody lives at the college. So that's just my feedback. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. That's exactly what I'm looking for here, to try to, tinker around stuff that's a little more logical. So I can go ahead and make those adjustments on that map. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions, comments from commissioners? Commissioner Hilliard.
Yes, thanks, Dr. Collingwood. One question I have is, your data captures the total population for each trustee area, along with the citizen voting age population. And I wanted to know, did your data capture which trustee areas will see a larger increase in the citizen voting age population over the course of these maps?
So if, are you asking, like, say in 5 years, kind of a
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
No, that's always a question we kind of deal with. It's a very difficult question to answer. There are ways to make projections, and it is difficult in the kind of sub city or sub unit analysis. So it's much easier to project about, say, Contra Costa County as a whole, what it's going to look like in 10 years, because we have a whole bunch of data going back. And then to look at these subpopulation areas, sub-districts or districts within a portion of Contra Costa County makes it even more difficult. So I think, though, as a general rule, in the United States, the Asian and Hispanic populations are growing. The Black population is holding steady, and the white population relatively is slightly dropping. Okay, so it's not that it's not growing, it's just the other, particularly Latinos, Hispanics, and Asians, AAPI, those are the two fastest growing populations, race or ethnicities in the United States. I see no reason why that wouldn't also be the case here.
Okay.
Now, there may be things locally that I don't know that could indicate population change. I have seen areas like Contra Costa County and others where the Black population has declined, has moved to other areas, and the Latino population has grown. I think that's a fairly I work in a lot of areas that are like that. San Bernardino, California, for example, is very similar in that regard. But it is very difficult for me, and at this point, I'm not comfortable making a projection on something like that. But this is something that if we really need, this became extremely important, I could look at in more detail and kind of come up with some ballpark estimates, but not the kind of thing that I'm as confident in as, say, these numbers here.
Okay, I appreciate that. My question was more just for general curiosity as to trends and just the population aging and natural deaths, things like that. So it seems like more of the focus is on having an adequate number of persons, 53,000 or so in each trustee area, and that most likely won't change too significantly over the next 10 years unless we get a crazy influx of new residents in a trustee area.
Right. So you're always going to get, right, like there will, in 5-10 years, there will be some areas that get more, some areas that get less, of course. And that's kind of part of what we're doing right now relative to what had been done before. In terms of which areas are going to be going up and which areas are going to be going down, you know, I'd have to guess like District 3 and District 1 are maybe going to grow a little bit, you know, based on the trends in
Nationwide
kind of,
trends.
yeah, but that's just a, you know, that's just an estimate or just a kind of a guess at this point.
Thanks. And one last question. Did you by chance look at any of the current school enrollment or magnet area data in the course of drawing the prospective maps? Because growing up in this district, you know, El Sobrani and Hilltop were always kind of connected in terms of that's where Juan Crespi drew its student population from. Same thing with De Anza. There might be some overlap with Pinole, but did the current school enrollment areas have any impact on your drawing the prospective maps?
No, not the enrollment. That's a very difficult thing because I have to base it on total population. And so to the extent that I can, I try to keep the attended zones together, but that's a kind of a lower down the level concern. And at the, you know, kind of when we're just wrapping things up and kind of once we have a map that we're zooming in on, can kind of make some tweaks on that if there's a couple of barren districts. But yeah, in terms of the enrollment, that is not something that I have been able to look at. That data, I think, are available and could be brought in. And so I'll make a note to Sean to do that. And so I'll do my best, at least by the next meeting or the one after that, to have a little bit more of a detailed information so you can at least assess the school enrollment of these different areas and or at least estimates because the attended zone's not going to, you know, overlap perfectly. And so there'll have to be some sort of aggregation, splitting or something like that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I really appreciate it. And I think as we get into that granularity, that's more where the commissioners and the public would have better input and more insight.
Definitely.
But I really like the maps, and I think you're doing a great job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from commissioners? Seeing none, we do have.
I'm sorry. I just have one little follow-up that came to mind from Commissioner Hillier's comments in terms of projections and trends. One thing we might just want to keep in mind is, and I'm not sure, maybe this won't have a big impact on how we proceed, but there has been a pretty significant, from my understanding, change in the Black population in West Contra Costa over the last few decades. Kind of a change in terms of the Latino population going way up and the Black population really declining. I think there was a time not long ago, Richmond was a heavily Black community, and that's not the case anymore. So to the degree that, you know, there's any kind of insights into whether those trends are going to continue or can be expected to continue, might just be something for us to keep in mind.
There was a, when I was on the community college board, we did look at that, and what we found was a migration rather than a decline. A migration of a population of the Black community moving from Richmond to the suburbs, and a lot of it into Pittsburgh and Antioch area. So we really didn't decline overall in Contra Costa. They just integrated more and just went into migrated, I guess is the word that was used. So that was an interesting phenomenon. Are there any other comments from commissioners this evening? Because I do have input from the public. then we will move on to public input. I'm going to start with a hand on the Zoom and then Mr. Diaz, if anybody at the Richmond Library would like to participate, please let us know. At this time, we're going to unmute, is it Zion Harrison?
It's the line. Thank you.
Zion,
Can you guys hear me?
yes.
Okay. One thing I'm concerned about, and I don't know if you guys mentioned it or talked about it before, I actually live in Area 4, but I'm right across the street, literally from Area 3, and my kids go to Area 3 schools. So I influence Area 3 as far as the voting and all that, and I worked, but I actually had to vote in Area 4, which I didn't, it was like kind of voter suppression because I didn't get to vote who the people who are going to be servicing my children in Area 3 because the schools that my children are in Area 3. So I live in San Pablo, but the schools that are assigned to my address is schools that are in Richmond. So I think that needs to be kind of defined, if it hasn't been, on making sure that the residents, that the parent can vote, is associated with the school that their children are attending. And also, I just feel that I heard you guys mention about a little bit touch on the voting for Black people being involved in the community and engaging. I think that's very important because one thing I found is that they're not always aware of the importance of these kind of meetings and what these meetings mean, because I literally did not get to vote for the people who affected my children. So thank you. That was just what I want to share.
Thank you, Ms. Harrison. That's really important, and we will take note of that, and we will continue it in our discussions and continue it when we look at our maps. Is there a public comment at Richmond Library, Mr. Diaz?
None in person.
I'll bring it back and ask again for any other public comments on our participants for Zoom or from commissioners. Seeing none, that will wrap up our.
I think Dr. Collingwood has a question or a
Yeah.
statement.
Or yeah, just if you don't mind, I really appreciate Ms. Harrison's point. If she's, I don't know if she's allowed to respond or I'm allowed to respond to her. I'm just curious what school district or school her kid or kids attend. Just so I can look at that and, get a sense of, that issue. What she's pointing out is certainly a major issue when it comes to schools.
Yeah, I live in Abella, which is right across the street from Helms. And so Helms is in Area 3, and my children attend Lake and Richmond High. So I wasn't able to vote for that area because that's Area 3. I got the ballot for Area 4, and I'm literally across the street from Helms.
Okay.
Thank you for that input. Yeah. Does that help? Does that answer, Dr. Collingwood, your question?
Yeah, definitely.
And we do
On
allow
this-
clarification because I think it's very important. This is a meeting for public input. And I want to thank again, Ms. Harrison, for being here, waiting patiently and sharing her comments. Are very valuable. We're here to listen, and thank you for your input. Commissioner Lazzaretti, did you have?
Yeah, just to follow up, I want to echo everything you said there, Commissioner Gordon, and this kind of input is exactly what we need. On this point, can we request that the school district provide us its attendance boundary zones for each of their schools so that we can look at that, or Dr. Collingwood in particular can look at it in terms of how it would fit in with these maps? That would be a good piece of, seems like a good piece of information to have at our disposal. And the other thing too, on the attendance boundary zones, I'm curious about is how liberal those zones are, especially when you get to the high school level. For instance, anecdotally, I know traditionally El Cerrito High School has drawn a fair number of students from Richmond and different areas of Richmond who go there, I think, largely because of their athletic programs. They're very successful. And I'm not sure how all that works, but that might be something that we should be aware of as well in terms of how strict the attendance boundary zones are or liberal they are.
Just
yeah,
to
so-
follow up on, oh, sorry, really quick to follow up on what Commissioner Lazzaretti said. In addition to the attendance zone information, whether the district can provide information about the current residence area for their enrolled students, because like Commissioner Lazzaretti said, there are intra-district transfers where I knew of students at El Cerrito High School who lived in the Hilltop area, who lived in El Sobrante, and had to travel quite a ways to school. So just so that all that information can be given to Dr. Collingwood to draw the most accurate map as possible.
So to respond to Commissioner Lazzaretti and Hilliard's points, good points. I do have the elementary and high school attendance zones. I don't have the middle school ones yet. I sort of got the first two, and they all overlap. They look like they're kind of like a Russian doll type situation, I guess, if that makes sense. And so from a demographer standpoint, it's easier to kind of start with the bigger ones and the high schools and kind of try to keep them together to the extent that we can. And then but the elementary schools, because there's a lot of them, it can get a little bit, more difficult, because what ends up happening is that is a point of tension often with the kind of vote VRA goal, right? And the population equivalency goal. And so for school districts and stuff like that, that's why, like Ms. Harrison's point, that's why probably, at least I hope so, that's why something like that occurs. It's not to say that it's good that it occurs, but the logic would be that the districts had to be drawn in a certain way based on block data to kind of boost up or decline based on these kind of VRA requirements. And so these things are kind of the probably in a way the two most important things we're going to be dealing with. And I would say that the attendance zones, in a way, to me, these are kind of like the main communities of interest in a school board type trustee seat type situation. Normally you might think of a community of interest as an area where, yeah, the kids go to school at the same area, and there's a park down the street, and there's a complex that someone built 20 years ago and we all live there or whatever. And that's great too. But this is a very specific type of electoral context, right? And in this, to me, the attendance zone becomes that kind of main focus. And so, that's going to be kind of the next step, is trying to line those up a little bit while also balancing that against these other kind of population demographic requirements. To Hilliard, Commissioner Hilliard's point, that's a great point. I'm not sure if my sense will be that the schools, we can get demographic data on the schools, because I've seen that generally, right? Number of students, you can get various test scores. If you wanted at the aggregate level, you can probably get some sort of racial demographic population data also. But it may be harder to get information about where the students live and then where they attend. There could be some sort of privacy issues around that. So my sense is that's going to be a hard thing to get. But I really appreciate the point. And, the more that we kind of start drilling down on things and getting very specific, like obviously the better. And then we kind of back out, right? And try to then look at it from a different angle. Okay, so sorry for talking so much, but yeah, I just want to respond.
No, that's fine. It's a great answer, Dr. Collingwood. Any further comments from panelists? I do see a hand up from Commissioner Tuila.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm just checking because Plan 3, Map 3 kind of triggering me to study further. And actually the concern of Ms. Harrison, right, actually answer the concern of Ms. Harrison, because the Plan 3 actually Helms and everybody everywhere surrounding Helms actually now belongs to District 3. So that means Miss Harrison children go to school in District 3, and so Miss Harrison can vote to the candidate that will think or care about the school in District 3 where her children go to. So that's just my feedback.
Thank you. Any further comments, questions from commissioners this evening? Mr. Pitts, did you want to follow up or conclude this portion of our agenda, item 7?
I think this is all extremely useful information, and I appreciate it. Well, obviously, it's something that I know the commission and Dr. Collingwood will all take into account.
Excellent. So that ends our discussion portion for item 6. Moving on to now item 7 is our commissioner reports, updates, and future agenda items. Are there any this evening from commissioners? I don't see any hands raised at this time, so I'll move on to item 8, our future meetings. Our next meeting is scheduled for November 30th. Also, all of our meetings and agendas can be found at the West Contra Costa Unified School District's webpage. I put the link in the chat, and you click on the pull-down menu about us, and we're down at the bottom for the commission. And November 30th meeting will be held at Contra Costa College at 6:30 p.m. for public. There will be a Zoom meeting as well. It's in Contra Costa College at the Fireside Room. And is there any other information about future meetings that I need to share at this time?
I just think as we've noted, and it's been publicly noted on the agenda on the commission's website, that the commission is planning to hold full meetings, including public outreach, but other agenda items as well, on both December 7th and December 14th, just in order to be able to take action on items that need to be acted on those 2 different dates.
Thank you, Mr. Pitts. That's a very important update. I'm glad you reminded me. And all of this information, again, can be found on the West Contra Costa Unified School District's website. Again, that information is posted in the chat. Is there any other further comment, questions from commissioners this evening? Any public comment on this future meeting agenda item? Seeing none, we'll move on to item 9, adjournment. Thank you all very much for attending this evening. Our meeting is adjourned.